Hey guys, it's Christy from the Stamp Cycle here, and today I have a watercolor card for you using the stamp set Helping Me Grow. That's in the 2016 Occasions catalog. And we're going to be using the other flower image that comes in that stamp set than the example that I had at the beginning there. So we have a piece of watercolor paper here, and I am going to treat it with my embossing buddy. We'll be heat embossing the flower image, so I want to make sure that the embossing powder does not fly all over the card, so that's why I'm using my embossing buddy. So we're going to be using that flower image there. I'm sure that flower has a name, but I have no idea what it's called. Alright, so I'm using my Misty to make sure I get good placement of this flower, and also so that I can apply a couple layers of this Versamark down on the watercolor paper. We are on the rough side, and sometimes it can be hard to get a nice crisp image on the rough side of the watercolor paper. So that's why I'm using my Misty, so I can stamp it 2 times and make sure I get a nice crisp image that we can heat emboss. So I'll be heat embossing this image in the gold embossing powder. I really like the look of watercolor with a gold embossed image. I think it gives a really nice finished look. So that's what we're doing today. Okay, so I'm just making sure I get that gold embossing powder all over the image to get a nice coverage. And this is a big image, so I had to make sure I got in all the little nooks and crannies there of that flower. And now I'm just going to take a dry paintbrush and just kind of swipe away any stray embossing powder that might have gotten stuck here and there on the paper. I don't want that on my final project, so I'm just going to use that paintbrush to brush it away. And then now I'm going to heat set it with my heat tool. And then we're going to tape this down. This is just a plastic palette that I picked up from a craft store. And I like to tape my watercolor paper onto this so that I can move the palette around, but then also use that plastic piece for mixing my colors and just putting my paint onto that and then onto my paper. So we're going to be using the Gansai Tambi Watercolor paints. This is the set of 6. That's more than 6, isn't it? 36 colors that I picked up off of Amazon. And I really like these watercolors. They are highly pigmented and they're very easy to work with. So if you're first getting into watercolor and you're a little hesitant, this is a good watercolor set to start out with. So I'm just taking a paintbrush, and what I like to do first before I actually start painting my project is I will test the colors that I'm using on just a scrap piece of watercolor paper to make sure that that's the color that I want to use for my project. These Gansai Tambi watercolors, just looking at the colors sitting in the pans there, it's really deceptive of what the actual color is once you start using it. So I even though I do have the top of my watercolor box with my swatches done, I still will test it out on a piece of paper just to make sure that's the color that I want to use. So the first thing we'll do is apply clean, clear water to the image that we're going to be coloring. What I like about watercoloring heat embossed images is the water and the paint stay inside of the individual heat embossed areas, if that makes sense. So for each of these small petals in this flower image, the water and the paint will stay within those embossed lines. So you don't have to worry about contaminating different parts of the flower as you paint. It's not like no line watercoloring where you have to let one area dry before you move on to the next. It's very easy to just put your water down and then start applying your paint, and you let the water do the work that sits in between all the embossed images. Hopefully that makes sense. So I've put down clean, clear water all over this first flower, and I'm just dropping in this pink color here, and I'm applying that all over this first flower image, and I'll go back in after this is dried a little bit and add more to get some shading and darker areas. But I'm putting down an initial wash of color on this flower. And I'll be using that purple color that you see as well, along with some green. So I'm going to turn on some music so that you do not get bored to death watching me watercolor this, and I will be back. Now that I have all of my flower images colored, I'm going to come in and create a wash of color in the background. And I want to do this wash of color in a rectangle shape around the entire flower image. So I'm first dropping in clean, clear water and drawing out the rectangle with that water. And then I'm dropping in this blue color. And I'm just going around the entire image there, and I've applied the blue color in between the little flower petals and just basically almost over the entire background of this piece. So now I've let this image dry, and I'm adding some ink splatters in gold, the purple that I used in the flowers, and then the green that I used in the stems as well. I'm going to remove the painter's tape now so that we can finish this card out. When you remove painter's tape, be sure that you pull it at an angle so it doesn't rip your paper. So for this, so you can see there a close-up of the watercolor and what I did there with the ink splatters. It was kind of hard to see in the video, so I wanted you to get a close-up. So we're creating a card base of, this is Blushing Bride, and it's cut at 8.5 by 4 1/4 so that you get a side folding card. I'm going to trim down the watercolor piece here so that it layers on the card with some room along the side there, because I want to add a strip of gold here later. And I'm going to work on my sentiment now. So I have a piece of vellum that I'm treating with my anti-static tool, and I'm using this sentiment from I do believe that stamp set's called Remarkable You, but I've got my Misty out again. I like to use my Misty for sentiments so that I can get perfect alignment. So what I do first for these cling mount stamps is I first stamp it on that grid paper to make sure that it's straight before I actually stamp it on my vellum or whatever cardstock I'm using. So I always usually do that first. And then now I'll stamp the sentiment in Versamark onto the vellum so that we can heat emboss that sentiment in the gold embossing powder to match the watercolor image that we used. So I'm just applying the gold embossing powder here to the sentiment. I will then heat set that with my heat tool, and then we will trim down this sentiment to just be a nice strip. And what I do with these, with vellum, when I want to apply a sentiment like this, is I keep the strip long so that I can line it up across the front of the card and then tuck in the extra bits behind. So I don't have to use any adhesive on the front that'll show through the vellum. I can just tape the ends of that vellum onto the back of my cardstock and really hide that adhesive. Vellum is hard to hide adhesive on, so I like to do my vellum sentiments this way. And I was just using my grid mat there to make sure the sentiment is straight. So now I want to add a strip of gold, like I mentioned, to bring more of that pops of gold to the card here. And I just have a very thin strip there. I think that might be a 1/4 of an inch strip. And I'm just going to put on the left hand side of the watercolor piece here. I'm just using my matte, multi-matte glue, so it dries matte and clear. I do wipe it off when I'm putting it on this gold foil if it seeps out any, because I find that even though this glue is supposed to dry matte, you can sometimes see it on this gold foil paper, so I do wipe off any that seeps out with a paper towel. And now I'm going to apply this whole piece onto the card base using my Tombow Mono Multi Liquid Glue. I like using this glue to apply layers because it does give you a little bit of time to wiggle it around and get perfect placement. So I'm going to put this on the front and then tip my card to the side and line it up that way to make sure I get perfect placement on my card base. And that finishes out this card for today. So I will, I'm trimming off a little bit of extra there that's hanging off the side, but that finishes it off, and I will bring the other one here for you that I made the other day. Same technique, just different image and different colors. So thank you for joining me.